All right, thank you so much for being here at the second of our 3 webinars on ABE Foundations. And I will turn things over to Rachel Stiglitz. We're so glad who's doing the heavy lifting on this one. Thanks, Rachel.
Great. Thank you, guys. This is webinar 2 out of 3 for ABE Foundations. So welcome. We'd like to know who you are. So if you can drop the where you're coming from and your role in the chat, that'd be really helpful. My name is Rachel Stiglitz, and I'm an ABE facilitator with Metro East Consortium. I provide intakes and proctor assessments for Mounds View Adult Education in the Ramsey County Correctional Facility. During this course over the course of this webinar series, you will meet staff and representatives from the Minnesota Department of Education, as well as various support network providers. Today we have with us Brad Haskamp. Brad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Patsy, and thank you, Team Atlas, for today's event. My name is Brad Haskamp. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the state adult education director here at the Minnesota Department of Education. Glad to meet with you. I was actually just thinking before today's session started, I was thinking about my first role in adult education. And my first role in adult education here in Minnesota was actually as a volunteer in a beginning English language learning classroom at a nonprofit organization in St. Paul. And it was meant to just be a one night, check this out and see what it was like. And then I realized, wow, I love the adult education classroom. Like there is some real magic happening in that classroom. And I quickly then signed up to be a regular volunteer. And then I left the country for a year, and when I came back, I said I wanted to come back to volunteer, and they said, "Well, I'm glad you want to volunteer. How would you like to get paid to do this work?" And then that led to my first paid position in adult education, and it has just kind of continued and evolved and grown since then. So, adult education is not always something that wasn't our career pathway when we first started, and yet, we find magic here and we find just connections that are outstanding, and we see growth, tremendous growth with our learners and with our colleagues, and it's amazing to see everything that happens within adult education. And I also just really appreciate the amount of power that we have to do good and to improve the entire system, no matter what role you play. So I'm glad to have you here today and glad to have you in adult education. And back over to Rachel.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it. So the main objective for this webinar series is meant to support your individual asynchronous work in the ABE Foundations online course. So either you're in the Canvas course right now, or you've taken ABE Foundations in the past and you're just using this as a refresher, okay? Together, these opportunities are designed to provide a thorough introduction to Minnesota adult basic education, and this includes who we serve, our system, policies, and procedures, the 3 sets of content standards that guide Minnesota adult education instruction, as well as opportunities for professional development and growth. So throughout this training, you will hear adult education, adult ed, adult basic education, and ABE. So these are all referring to the same thing. Adult education is the federal term. Adult basic education is used in the Minnesota state statute. Many programs in recent years have shifted from ABE to adult education because, well, like here it notes GED math, for example, is not basic. I can think of several other very intense courses for our ABE students, like Certified Nursing Assistant, CompTIA, entry-level IT, career training. Those are pretty intense. So the adult education system is governed and funded at the federal level, the state level, and the local level to serve and support our students. In this overview, we will cover this system, the adult education system, policies and accountability, instruction and programming, and this includes content standards, distance learning, transitions, IET, which is integrated education training, and ACP, which is adult career pathways, and secondary credentials, volunteers, and professional development. So today's agenda, Brad and I introduced ourselves. We'll do a quick little warm up with the group here, and then we'll do an introduction to the adult basic education system. We'll do a break, and after that, we'll dive right in to policy, accountability, and the national reporting system. And then we'll do a quick wrap up, okay? Last week's webinar covered the introduction to adult education students and the secondary credentials that Minnesota offers. On October 22nd, we will cover content standards, volunteers in adult basic education, and professional development. And that's the third and final of this webinar series for the moment. So, we just have a couple people here. So, you know, you can drop in the chat, or if you feel more comfortable, open up and your mic, unmute, and let us know which picture best represents your time in adult education. I could say for myself 4, because you know, you can't just build a desk with, you know, only bolts, right? You have to have nuts and bolts and other things to hold it all together. And I feel like, you know, I wouldn't be able to just run a program myself, or, you know, as an instructor, just be supported without anybody else's help. So and the students need us, and that's where I feel like I fit in number 4. Oh, we got mosaic number 3.
Yeah, well, people are deciding. I just think there's so many different pieces of the puzzle for me as far as professional development and those teaching GED and HiSET, those working on adult diploma, those doing English as a second language, those working at distance learning. Like there's so many pieces, and somehow it comes together beautifully.
Yep, and Walter's with me 4, learning all the pieces, put it all together. And Mandeep says 2. It's beautiful. Oh, and Brad 3 and 4. Great options. And number 1, Brad agrees with number 1. It's unique and you don't know where you're going. Okay, so we'll move on. Oops, got to get to the right page. So where can I access this information for later? So Atlas website has a Minnesota adult education frequently asked questions page. And as well, you can access deeper information in the ABE Foundations online course. You know, this webinar is being recorded. You will also receive the PDF of all the slides. So, you know, as Patsy, you know, as we discuss any links, she'll pop them in the chat. But when you get those slides, you can also access the links that we mention in the slides. Okay. So I'm going to pass baton on over to Brad for an introduction to adult education system.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm excited to talk with you about our adult education system here in the state of Minnesota. So let's start with our objectives. So we have 3 core objectives for this chunk. We want to make sure that you are able to identify the 3 levels that create our Minnesota adult basic education system. We also want to make sure that you're able to identify the 4 parts of our state adult education funding formula for adult education consortia or grantees. And we also want to make sure that you're able to articulate how last year's contact hours determine this year's funding. So let's start with the big numbers. Over the year, there are roughly 1,300 paid staff, most of them part-time, I should say, staff, that serve approximately 50,000 adult students annually in our Minnesota adult education system. Of that 1,300 staff, 867 are teachers, and of those 867 teachers, 68% of those teachers are part-time teachers. We also have 123 paraprofessionals, 57 counselors, and 268 administrators. Now, this may look really clean cut, like, oh, here, like everyone has these roles. You might also say, well, in my program, I'm part teacher, part para, and part administrator. We acknowledge that people frequently have to play many different roles within the system. But yet with our federal reporting, we have to categorize, everyone has to categorize them in which role do they play the majority, or are they doing the majority of their work in? So when they break it down and report to us, that this is how those numbers break out. And in addition to those 1,300 staff, there are more than 1,400 trained volunteers to help support that system and provide an invaluable system for our adult education programs and for our learners, whether that be one-on-one work, pull-out, testing help, or other types of counseling and support. Wow, it's important. It's fascinating to know that our volunteers in our system actually outnumber our paid staff in the Minnesota adult education system. And overall, our system is funded by roughly $60 million in annual total funding. And we'll break that out a little bit more later. But roughly, we're working and serving 50,000 people with $60 million per year. So the levels of our adult education system are threefold. The first level is the federal level. And we'll dive into that a little bit more, what the federal level looks like and what composes the federal level with adult education. Next is state, and we'll dive into that a little bit further. And finally, your level, the local level, very important in our work. And that's really where all of our work hits the ground. And that's the work that the students see and the level that the students see. So let's dive into each of those levels, and we'll start on the next slide with the federal level. So let's dive into how do things start with the federal government with adult education? Let's go on the next slide and start with some acronyms you should know, because goodness gracious, of course we have to define everything in acronyms. So there's three key acronyms that are important to know in order to analyze and lay out our federal system. The first acronym is NRS, which you've already heard Rachel refer to. NRS is our national reporting system. That is our national, or I should say our federal accountability reporting system. So all of our reports go into the NRS. Next is OCTAE. And OCTAE is an office within the U.S. Department of Education called the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, OCTAE. And then also WIOA, or WIOA, and that is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act of 2014, and we'll dive into a little bit more of how WIOA governs our work. So let's dive a little bit more into WIOA. Again, as we said on the previous slide, WIOA stands for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And WIOA is the federal law that governs or oversees adult education programs at the state level and even at the local level. It also oversees workforce centers, our career force here in Minnesota, and vocational rehabilitation programs. So all of us together, adult education, career force, and vocational rehabilitation, we are all programs under WIOA. And with this law, going even more in depth, in this law from 2014, this also, in addition to governing our adult education system, it funds our adult education system and our entire workforce development system. Adult education is considered a core title program within workforce development and our state's workforce development system. And the purpose, according to WIOA, the purpose of that law is to improve the coordination between each of our programs, both within adult education and across workforce development, to support employment services, to support workforce development, to support adult education, and support vocational rehabilitation activities to make them stronger and more interrelated and integrated. With that, there are some priority areas that the law sets out. It really looks to increase collaboration and partnerships. It also looks to, it develops a focus on transitions work or transitions programming and work. And it also requires that all of our instruction aligns to a set of to our content standards within our system. So as you can see here, WIOA, if you look at that blue column on the left, there are 5 different titles to the WIOA law. And Title 1A, Title 1B, Title 2, Title 3, Title 4, Title 5. Adult education is Title II of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And Title II actually has its own name called the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, or AFLA. So you'll sometimes hear people talk about WIOA. You also will have sometimes people talk about Title II or AFLA, and that all pertains to adult education. And so you'll also notice on this orange row that the entity that oversees adult education in Minnesota is the Minnesota Department of Education. Unlike all of our other partners, the title programs in Title 1B, Title 1 Youth, Title 1 Adult, Title 1 Dislocated Worker, our career force centers, and our vocational rehabilitation programs, those other title programs in WIOA are actually overseen by DEED. Adult education is the unique entity in our workforce development system that is actually overseen by the Minnesota Department of Education. And so as we look to define adult education, the federal law actually also creates a specific definition of what adult education is. And it is defined as academic instruction and education services below the post-secondary level that increase an individual's ability to read, write, and speak in English, to do mathematics and other activities necessary for the attainment of a secondary school diploma or an equivalency diploma. It also defines adult education as transitioning to post-secondary education and training, and also helping an individual obtain employment. So those are the things that we are doing here in adult education according to the federal law, helping people improve their English, improve their math skills and other skills necessary to earn a diploma or an equivalency, to transition successfully into post-secondary and training, and succeed in employment. That is the definition of adult education in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So now that federal system, we've talked about the law of WIOA, and that was passed through the legislative branch. And with that, so in addition to the law, we also see that there's the executive branch with OCTAE through the U.S. Department of Education that's helping to develop additional regulations or provide additional technical assistance to states to help operate their state adult education systems. So both the legislative branch and the executive branch really help make up that federal level. And each of those actually also has funding connected with all of those as well that we'll get into a little bit later. So that's the federal system. Now let's dive into the Minnesota. What does that state level look like in this system? So as we go first, much like WIOA, there is state statute that defines our work in adult education. So if we go on the next slide, we can see that adult education in the state of Minnesota is actually defined through Minnesota State Statute 124D, specifically like 124D.52, as well as some other statutes. If you are interested in learning more about that, about the state statute and what it says about adult education, Patsy has put the link to the reviser's website where you can read that statute word for word and see a little bit more about what it says about adult education and what we do in the state of Minnesota. You'll also notice that it uses like Rachel said, it uses the word adult basic education in state statute, whereas the federal law talks about adult education. And you'll see a lot of similarities between the federal law and the state statute, but you'll also see some differences in how they articulate our system and what we do. And then in addition to that state level, in addition to the legislation through Minnesota state statute, there is a team at the Minnesota Department of Education in our adult education state office to help oversee programs issue grant funding, and provide technical assistance. And so our team of 7 includes me as the state director, Neil Allard, our communications and administrative support specialist, Astrid Leiden, our professional development specialist, Jody Versa, our ABE program quality specialist, Brandy Logan, our adult high school equivalency and accountability specialist, Julie Dinkow, our ABE transition specialist, and Haley Swanson, our grants, records, and administrative support specialist. So this team of 7 oversees the entire adult education system and performs those state level functions. You may recognize Brandy because Brandy was with you in the first session of ABE Foundations, talking about our our high school equivalency options. In addition, at that state level with that team at the Minnesota Department of Education, there is also what we have as a support network that is funded through state funding and some federal funding to help all adult education programs around the state with professional development, with support services to help them increase the capacity of our system. And so we have 5 entities that fulfill that work. We have Southwest ABE, which helps with a lot of our assessment services. We have Literacy Minnesota, which helps with our hotline with outreach services as well as volunteer services. And also the technology services, including distance learning and our statewide database. Atlas, who we're well familiar with as our host for today's webinar, they coordinate a lot of our professional development services with Atlas with Hamline University. We also have Panda, which oversees a lot of our support in terms of serving adults with disabilities. And then finally, Literacy Action Network, which is our member organization. But in addition to that, as being a member organization for adult education field members, they are also a supplemental service provider that are helping with a lot of initiatives, as well as coordinating and planning and implementing our state annual conference for adult education. So that's how we define our state level. There's the legislation with state statute, and then we have parallel to the executive branch at the federal level, we have our Minnesota Department of Education, our adult education team, and then with grants that go out to programs, there's also 3% of our state funding goes to that Minnesota Adult Education Support Network that I was describing. So that is our state level. Now let's talk about the local level. So as you can see from this map, there are programs or grantees that are designed or designated to serve every school district, every square mile of Minnesota is under one of our grantees areas. There are a total of 39 grantees serving the entire state of Minnesota. And that is really exciting to see that there is the potential for service everywhere in the state of Minnesota. But let's dive into that a little bit more on the next slide. So from the Minnesota Department of Education and from the Minnesota Adult Education Support Network, we provide grants, policy, and support to 39 consortia. Those are 39 grantees that serve in the state of Minnesota. And each of those grantees might be a single provider within that consortium, or there might be more than a dozen providers within that one consortium or within that area. And then those organizations that provide the adult education service, they're sometimes called subgrantees. They work at their individual sites, which could be physical locations. It also could be online. And those entities and instructors provide the instruction and the programming for each and every one of our students. Because as we click on the next animation here, the students are really the heart of the work. They are the core of what we do and why we have all of these levels and layers to really make sure that we are able to effectively serve students no matter where they live in Minnesota. Hopefully that is our goal. And our learners are here coming to us for a wide variety of educational, career, and life goals that we hope to help them fulfill. So at this point, we are going to have a little bit of a time for breakout, right, Rachel?
Well, I don't know. We don't have too many people on, so we might keep this open for those that are with us. I know we have Walter, Carrie, Mandeep may have gone to help out with some students, but doesn't matter. Um, you
I think
guys
I'll
can,
just close the recording for the moment and then people can feel
perfect,
free to talk. Yeah.
perfect. Is the recording off?
Hold on 1 second. I almost got it.
Recording on?
Well, thanks for talking through your programs. Now let's talk about the money. How are all of the programs funded? And so we said earlier that there's roughly $60 million in adult education funding our Minnesota adult education system. And of that $60 million, approximately 7 million is from federal funding and resources, and 53 million is coming from state funding. So what this tells us is that actually Minnesota as a state has a strong investment in adult education. We are unusual and we receive more state money per federal dollar than almost every other state in the nation. There might be only one that is close to us or maybe even more than us, but we are in the top two in terms of the amount of state funding that we get compared to our federal money. There are some states that operate primarily and only on the federal money. So imagine if we had to do everything that we are currently doing or trying to run an adult education system without that 53 million and just the 7 million. What that means is 90% of the staff in the state of Minnesota would likely be laid off, and 90% of our programs and sites would likely be shut down. So we're very happy, we're very proud that Minnesota sees the value of adult education and invests in adult education. And on top of that, with all that considered, there still isn't enough money to really serve every person that really needs adult education services. But it shows that I'm so thankful that we have the investment that we do from the state of Minnesota, and yet we see how we could do so much more with more resources. So let's go on the next slide, and this will break it down so you can see over 6 years how much state adult education aid we've received, how much federal adult education aid we've received, how much has come from programs, the IELCE program in particular, and that is a part of our federal, that is a addition to the federal adult education aid. And you can see that year by year total in that bottom row. And what is helpful to see here is that if you look just at the total, you do see some increases in the amount that we receive year over year. Maybe I'd love to see in the chat, what else do you observe when you look at this chart in terms of our state and federal funding for Minnesota adult education between 2020 and 2025? What do you see? Is there anything that stands out to you with this data? As I noted before, what also will likely stand out is just how much more federal money we have compared to how much more state funding we have compared to federal funding. And that you're noting, Rachel, that you see that there's been almost a steady increase in state funding year after year for the most part. There's been like 22 to 23 is pretty much flat, not very much, but then we're still seeing growth at least every year. The federal money we've definitely seen growth there, thankfully, as well, but it isn't as consistent. The federal money comes to us in a formula that is just based off of our population, especially a population without a diploma.
And Walter mentions in the chat, yeah, voting is important, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Okay, so then you might be curious. Okay, so I see that there's roughly 52 to $53 million in state funding in adult education, but how do we determine what the state legislature allocates and flow that all the way down to your program? And so there is, from the Minnesota Department of Education, we have a 4-part formula that is in state statute that and that helps define how much each grantee receives. We only think about each grantee or each consortium. We're not saying that this is how each program or provider within that consortium is funded. This is just how does MDE divvy out the money to each of the grantees. And so first and foremost, we look at the base population aid for the area that you serve, and that is defined by your school district members. And so there's and this is set in statute that for every person that lives in your geographic area, in your school district area, you get $1.73 per resident. And then we look at that for the district. And so in Minneapolis, that's thousands and thousands of dollars. There is a per district minimum of $3,844. So if it's a very small school district area, you might just get that $3,844 for that district member. Then after the base population aid is articulated or allocated, then we look at the contact hour rate. So we look at last year's contact hours, and then that helps determine this year's funding. So for this current year that we're in 24-25, we looked at the contact hours that your consortium documented from May 1st, 2023 to April 30th, 2024, and during that period, each contact hour equated to $9.60 per contact hour. And this is the majority of the funding or at least it's the biggest pot of funding for most consortia in the state of Minnesota. It comes through via the contact hour funding. And then finally, there's a small percentage that's given out then to your member districts, the K-12 districts. What they report as their limited English proficiency rate, how many students have limited English proficiency. And so there's $45.72 per K-12 LEP student in your member districts. And then we also look at in your member districts, how many people are over the age of 25 and do not yet have a diploma. And so per person, that's $8.97 per individual without a high school diploma who lives in that member district area. So that is how we divide each of those 4 parts of the funding. So let's break this down again. I want to make sure that you really understand that. So let's click. So as we look at this roughly $53 million, the way we break it out through our state formula here at MDE is we take that total amount of state funding, roughly 53 million, and we first put it in our computer system generates the base aid, and that is about 10 million total of the 53 million goes out via base aid. And that leaves 43 million. And so the next step that our computer system does, it divvies out that 43 million. 84% goes to contact hours, so that's 36 million, and then 8% goes to the LEP rates and to the over 25 no diploma, so that's about 3.4 million each. So as you can see, the majority of the funding is going out via contact hours, and that is why you might hear from your administrators or you might hear from other people in your consortium about the importance of contact hours, because that really is the #1 metric in which we determine funding for adult education programs. So this is how that computer metric works to divvy out the funding here in the state of Minnesota. And again, that is Minnesota State adult education funding. And per year, that contact hour rate, though, is still not very much. So for every hour of service, contact hour that was documented last year, your consortium received $9.60. So imagine if you have 2 students in your class that you're serving at one time, you got less than $20 for that service, for that hour of work for those 2 students. And so it's really hard. It's really challenging to run an entire program off those contact hours. And yes, you have those other parts of the funding, but the majority of the funding is coming via contact hour rates. And so that's why you'll also see a lot of pressure for, if I'm working, I should try to be generating contact hours as well. Some programs really try to stress that, especially with their instructors and or counselors. On the federal side, it's much simpler. There are some there's some federal money that goes to support regional transitions work and things like that. But the majority of the funding is going out to contact hours, just to contact hours. We do not divvy it out according to population or LEP rates or individuals over 25 without a diploma. This really goes out just based off of contact hours. And because the federal total pot of funding is so much smaller, you'll see that the contact hour rate is much smaller. So for every hour of service that was delivered last year within your consortium, you received 93 cents per contact hour. So if you had, again, that one class of 2 students in an hour, you generated less than $2 in federal funding, or that class generated less than $2. And we don't want to think about our work in financial, purely in financial, because it's really about the impact of the individual. And yet this really stresses how little money you get for the work that's being done. It is really difficult to run a program just with the adult education funding that we have. So let's take some time to process this. We've talked about that contact hour rate at the state level and at the federal level. And now let's give you a word problem, because if you're teaching math, you love word problems, and your students all love word problems, right? So let's take this scenario. You are an adult education teacher. On September of 2024, you had, actually, this should probably be 2023. You had 12 students attend the full class, and your class is 2 hours long. So based on that math, we have some questions for you here. First, how many contact hours were generated in that class? 2, if this was in September of if this was September 22 of 2024, what did those contact hours mean in terms of contact hour state funding and contact hour federal funding? And what did that mean in terms of total funding for your program or for your consortium? So I'm going to give you some time to do the math. You'll see in the chat that Rachel has provided those contact hour rates, a reminder that we shared on the other page, that those contact hour rates for every hour last year, that was every contact hour documented, that equated to $9.60 in state funding and 93 cents in federal funding. So love to hear you in the chat. What's the question? What's the answer to question 1? Let's start with how many contact hours were generated in this scenario. Can anyone tell us in the chat? Anyone? 24. Yep. 24 contact hours were generated. And then let's kind of walk through this. And then let's talk through and show on the next slide where we actually divvy this out and share how much this class generated. If this class was offered in September of 23, there were 24 contact hours would have been generated. That would have meant that your consortium received $230.40 in state funding and $22.32 in federal funding. So that 2-hour class generated $252.72 total in funding for that 2-hour GED class. Yeah, excellent. So a couple things to note. So again, remember, contact hour funding is based off contact hours generated last year for this year's funding. Last year's work for this year's funding. And grantees that are not school districts and not affiliated directly with school districts, like some of our nonprofits and community-based organizations, the Minnesota Department of Corrections as an example, many of those entities only receive contact hour funding. They do not receive the other 3 parts of the state funding. They do not receive base population aid, LEP rates, or over 25 no diploma if they don't have any school districts that are members of their consortium of that grant. Yeah. And then finally, we acknowledge that in many cases is not enough money to fund adult education. So we see many of you seeking additional sources of funding, additional resources to help fund your adult education classes. And that could be additional state and federal grants like our civics grant, which is also called the ILCE, or Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Grants. Pathways to Prosperity through the Department of Employment and Economic Development. Foundation grants like through United Way and other foundations. Also, contracts for services, say Working with employers to do workplace literacy. Maybe that employer is paying for your teacher's time to provide that service. Private donations and student materials fees. Yes, programs sometimes have to charge a nominal student material fee in order to help make financial ends meet. And I would also just say, let's not discount private donations. When I was working at the local level, I remember we got a private donation of $10,000 to help pay for student educational materials that went directly to the students. And that was really outstanding to see. Like, that made such an impact to those learners for multiple years because they got textbooks, they got educational resources that they could take home with them and that they could use. And so those private donations can be significant for a program, for a site. So there's many ways to fund an adult education program above and beyond the state and federal funding.
Great. We don't have a lot of time right now for this question. So I'm going to drop this question in the chat and, and then we'll take a 5-minute break and then everybody come back. And then we have a lot to cover with the policy, accountability, and assessments. Okay, so I'll drop this question in the chat next. Okay, and I'll start the break. Okay. Okay, now we're recording. Okay. So this next section that we're going to cover in the webinar is about policy, accountability, and national reporting system. So there's a lot to cover here, so we're going to break it up into 3 sections covering policy, accountability, and assessments. For the policy section, the objectives we're going to look at are we're going to see how can we locate the education policies for Minnesota adult education. Determine which activities can generate contact hours, money, remember, and which cannot, and distinguish between ABE core instructional content and versus conditional content, okay? So on the website for Minnesota Adult Basic Education, there is a policy page, and we have a screenshot here of that page. So some of the policies that we're discussing in today's webinar is going to cover eligible content policy, contact hour policy, as well as assessment policy. With last week's webinar, we covered the eligible student policy. And next week's webinar, we're going to be covering staff and volunteer training policies. Okay. So what is covered in the eligible content policy? So looking at the 12 different subjects we have here, which 7 of these do you think, and I'll let you guys, you can drop whatever you think in the chat, either 1 or 2, which 7 of these do you believe is considered core content? And core content would be academic. So I'll give you a second or 2 if anybody wants to take a shot at all 7 or even just one of the 7 you think might be eligible content, content and what is core content that is. Okay. Okay, I'll make it easy for you. The top 7 that are highlighted in yellow are core content. Okay. The bottom 5 down here. So core content is academic content, reading, writing, math, speaking, listening, English language content, and high school equivalency. So covering those credentials. And then conditional content is citizenship, basic technology skills, employability skills, study skills, and health and financial literacy. So all students in state and federally funded adult basic education programs must be receiving instruction in at least one of the core content areas highlighted in yellow, okay? Conditional content, the ones below those, must be supplemental to core content. The only exception is if this is if a student has a conditional work referral through a career force, employment, or MFIB counselor. Okay, so an example of conditional content that can supplement core content would be like, if a student is receiving instruction on computer skills if they're using software applications like Word or Google to assist them in learning a core content subject like writing. Okay, so that's just an example. Okay, I'm going to move on, but if you guys have questions, unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. Okay. The next policy we'll cover is the contact hour policy. So adult education contact hours are student times spent during intake and assessment, time students spend in adult education classroom, time students spend on distance learning, these are called proxy hours, and time students spend with an adult education trained volunteer. Now we'll cover more about volunteer training requirements in our next webinar, but we'll talk briefly about the proxy hours, okay? What are they, right? So distance learning proxy hours, it's time allocated for successful lesson completion for student work outside of class with an approved distance learning curricula. And where can you find that approved curriculum? Literacy Minnesota, like Literacy Minnesota Counselor has on their website, they have a web page that shows all the platforms that are approved by the state of Minnesota for instructors to provide, instruction and allow sites and programs to use this curriculum where they can collect proxy hours for students that are working off-site on this curriculum, okay? So we'll spend more time talking about distance learning in the next webinar. And I know, yeah, thank you, Patsy. She put in the chat the Literacy Minnesota platform page. You'll see North Star is one of those. Burlington English, Khan Academy. These are where an instructor who, allows a student to use this, they go home, they can work on it offsite, you can collect proxy hours for your program, okay? But it has to be an approved program. So we have to be careful about and avoid double counting hours. So we cannot count contact hours for time when students are working in the classroom on a distance learning platform if we're also counting proxy hours for that completed work, okay? So if they're in a classroom and they're working through North Star or Burlington English, those are approved platforms, that's classroom contact hours. If they go home, work on this off-site, doing their thing, that is proxy hours, okay? So, just drop in the chat what you think. And which of the following can you not count ABE contact hours for? A, is it registering a new student? B, testing a new student? C, a student's homework, or D, counseling a student? Which of these can you not count contact hours for? You guys can drop your answer in a chat. Yep, it looks like we're on the right track, Walter, Carrie. It is C, a student's homework. And I see Lanessa brought this up. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad that Lanessa, I'm glad that you're taking something away from the online learning platforms. That's great. Okay, so yes, right. A student, if a teacher gives them a packet of work to take home to work on, or if they're writing an essay at home on a book they read, I mean, that cannot be counted. Okay, it has to be in classroom time spent with the instructor or an approved learning platform they can collect proxy hours on. Okay. Okay, next section here is accountability measures. So here we're identify the 12 educational functioning levels, EFLs. Find the current year targets for measurable skills gains, MSGs. Describe how adult basic education students demonstrate MSGs. And identify the 6 accounting measures in WIOA. Okay, so what is accountability? Accountability requirements exist to ensure that ABE providers are responsible students of public funds. So remember all that money we talked about earlier? We have to account for it. We have to demonstrate, show how we're using it, okay? Or how we're counting our time. So how is data collected and inputted? So programs enter data in the Student Information Database, we call that SID. And the data entered is student information. That's like, contact information for students, demographic information. Student attendance hours, those are contact hours. Student assessment results. So if they do a pre-test with you at the time of intake, you enter that in. And of course, if they, are with you and they do a post-test, you can maybe even earn a level gain from that. We'll talk about that more later. And other student data collected is put into SID, like WIOA barriers to employment. We discussed about earlier in our first webinar, the WIOA barriers to employment, and those are things like English language learners, ex-offender, do you have a disability, single parent. So all that information gets collected in SID, okay? Okay. So how is accountability monitored in Minnesota? So the data collected and SID by your program is then submitted by the consortium to Minnesota Department of Education, okay? The consortia submit data to MDE on June 1st with an annual application, August 1st for the August submission, and December 15th, a final fiscal completion report, okay? Then MDE creates statewide reports and submits this to U.S. Department of Education. So the data is reviewed, and consortia that report annual results that are below the state performance targets, we'll talk about the targets shortly. So if they are reporting things below those targets, that's affected by the Adult Basic Education Program Improvement Policy, which includes actions such as site visits, training, evaluations, and more. Every 5 years, each consortia submits a narrative detailing program results, successes, organizational structure, adherence to state and federal requirements, as well as future plans. This narrative is then reviewed by the Minnesota Department of Education and evaluated for new and continuing approval of funding. Okay. So how is accountability monitored federally? The National Reporting System, NRS, defines accountability requirements that are defined by the U.S. Department of Education. So these are not things that we're creating. It's it's on the federal level. Okay. So, and then we have, so these are the NRS levels, okay? So we have ESL, English as Second Language levels, and they start from 1 to 6. ESL 1 is beginning ESL literacy. ESL 6 is advanced ESL, so it goes up to that. We also have NRS levels for ABE, Adult Basic Education levels. Again, ABE 1 is beginning ABE literacy, and it goes up to ABE 6, which is high adult secondary. So in SID, we'll see these NRS levels defined as EFL, educational functioning levels. So when you open up a student's page in SID, on that summary page, you can see it won't say NRS, it'll say EFL, level 1, level 2, whatever. Okay. So note, the NRS defines student levels for purposes of accountability and reporting. Okay. Local decisions on class groupings and class placements could be different. So what does that mean, right? So here's an example. So there are 6 ESL NRS levels, okay? ESL level 1 through 6. If your site has only 4 English language teachers, right, and 4 classes, placement of those students in those 4 classes could look different if a site, if you're comparing it to another site that might have 6 teachers and 6 different classes, okay? So that decision is made at a local level. And how do we measure and report student outcomes? that is, the short answer is WIOA measures, okay? And measurable skills gains are the most common, and we typically hear these as level gains. Okay, so a level gain is in which a student increases their educational functioning level (EFL) level by completing an approved pre-test and then earning a higher score on a corresponding post-test to advance to a higher level. So, say when you did intake for a student and they landed an ESL level 1, after instruction, they take a post test, and then they land into ESL level 2. That's a level gain. Okay, so they've gained from NRS level 1 to 2. Another measurable skill gain is entry into a post-secondary, post-secondary education like college, or they go into an occupational skills program. So if they exit your program, say they're an English language student, they leave your program, you've exited them, and they've gone into, like they've entered a college level, college, right? As long as they do that by June 30th, that's a level gain for your program, okay? So again, we might not be tracking that. We don't know after they leave our program if, did they go to college or not. We might not be able to track that. That's another reason to be able to get as much information at intake, filling out those intake forms, getting the correct data in SID. So when the state runs reports, they can match that data, name, date of birth, social security number. So we can then get those level gains. Okay. Another measurable skill gain is earning enough Carnegie units for a level gain, and that is moving from ABE 5 to 6. At this point, Minnesota, it's not applicable here right now. Okay. Another measurable skill gain is when a student obtains their high school credential at your site by June 30th. Okay, so say a student earns a GED or high set, or a Minnesota Standard Adult High School Diploma, or a credit completion diploma. These are the things that we discussed in the last webinar. But if it's entered into SID, say they earn the completion diploma through Mounds View, right? We have to make sure that that is documented in SID on the history page that they completed that, and that's a level gain for us, okay? With like the HSE, that's generated by the state and it'll automatically show up in SID, okay? But those need to be reported by June 30th so we can get that gain. Additional measurable skill gains. One is exhibiting progress on a post-secondary transcript for a student. So one of your students, they exit ABE, enter college, and they're doing really great in college. That's a win. 4 and 5 are a little less common MSGs. That depends on if your program delivers an IET, that's Integrated Educational Training Program, or workplace literacy program. These are career focused, okay? So on 4, showing progress towards those milestones within that program, or 5, passing a technical or occupational knowledge-based exam. That's where they might get an industry recognized credential, like I'm trying to think, like a what do you call it? Commercial driver's license. If you're in an IET, you're offering that. That could be a level gain. Okay. Exit-based WIOA measure. Additional level gains are employment at second quarter after exit, employment at fourth quarter after exit, medium earnings at second quarter after exit, so they're increasing their earnings, a credential earned, and they enter into a post-secondary program for employment. That's a measurable skill gain, and an effectiveness in serving employers. Again, to get these gains, these are reports run by the state on the back end. So your program might not know, how much somebody's making in there as they exit your program and stuff, right? Again, that's a reason to collect information that can be matched to your student. Name, date of birth, social security number if they have one, okay? To be able to earn these gains. So the federal accountability targets, the U.S. Department of Education and Labor sets state level expected outcomes for ABE programs. So these targets, they focus on adult education students making MSGs, measurable skill gains, and the numbers are set as percentages of participants. And a participant is somebody that is over 12 hours in your program year. Okay, and a program year is July 1st to June 30th. Okay, so here's a snapshot of what the measurable skill gain targets are and were. So for the program year 23-24, it was 28%. That's what programs needed to be shooting for on level gains, earned credentials, and so on within that program. This year, it's been raised for the 24-25 program year to 36.7%. Okay. So this could be another thing that program managers might be harping on teachers, instructors to be taking a shot at. So keep in mind, students included in the federal measures are ABE students with at least 12 plus hours during the program year, July 1st to June 30th. Once students have over 12 contact hours, they move from enrollee to participant. So if you have a student that earns their GED with your program, but during that program year, they didn't put in the 12 hours, you might have worked with them 100 hours last program year, but then this year program year, they finish and earn that GED. Great win for you, but if they didn't put in 12 hours, you're not going to collect that measurable skill gain. Okay, the important thing is that they got that, and that's what matters, right? But things to keep in mind. So if you have questions about accountability, of course, you can let us know here if you want, if you put in a chat or unmute yourself. But of course, you can always ask your program supervisor, okay? Sid, Jenny and Mary, the support team for Sid, they're fantastic. They answer things right away. And if they don't know the answer, they know where to go. And then, of course, questions regarding accountability goes to Dr. Brandy Logan, who is the accountability specialist for the state of Minnesota. Okay. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on so we can be cognizant of time. So, assessments. Here in this section, we're going to identify approved assessments for ABE and ESL leveled students, determine which tests are being used in your program, demonstrate understanding of the test certification process and resources, and articulate pre-testing and post-testing requirements. So the approved assessments for adult education in Minnesota are CASAS, which is Comprehensive Adult Assessment System. We have got CASAS Goals, Reading and Math for AB levels 1 and 6, and CASAS Steps, Reading and Listening for ESL levels 1 through 6. Okay. TABE, which is Tests for Adult Basic Education. Right now we have TABE 11-12, Reading, Math, and Language, and these are used for ABE levels 1 through 6. And then we have Basic English Skills Test, BEST Plus. Right now we're on version 2.0. And these are for ESL, and they're used to determine ESL levels 1 through 6. And these specifically assess listening and speaking skills. Right now, BEST Plus 2.0 will be expiring on June 30th, 2025. All assessments are available paper-based and computer-based. So, new assessments are on the way. Approved but not yet available is BEST Plus 3.0. And not approved yet and not available yet is TABE 13 and 14. I'm sure we'll be learning more about that as we move on. So when should programs pre-test ABE students? As soon as possible. Okay, students are required to pre-test within the first 12 hours with their adult education program. And you will not be able to collect hours for a student in your program until they take that test. If they've put in 12 hours and they haven't done a pretest, you cannot enter those hours in SID until they take a pretest. Okay. When can a program post-test ABE students? once a student reaches 40 contact hours since their previous test. So programs cannot test students before 40 hours. So when you're looking at SID, on that front page, and maybe on the second page assessments, you can also see if it's in red, the tests are in red, you can't test them yet. They haven't made 40 hours. Once they turn green, that means you can test them. They've put that student's put in more than 40 hours. Okay, and you can post test them. So if you use the test, you need to complete certification training. That means teachers, support staff, admin, whoever is, proctoring a test, you need to be able to go through the training. Okay, these are offered in person and online. And we have a link to Minnesota ABE assessments, and you can see the most current scheduling for certifications. Okay, so I went through a lot. That was a lot, but we have about 6 minutes until this ends. If anybody has anything to share, open up your mic and let us know, or if you have a question. Of course, I don't think we have too much time, but if you think of it, what's one thing you're taking away from today, you can share it with us or not. But I'll keep going because I want to be very cognizant of time. If anybody has anything, please let us know. Okay. Any questions? Okay, I'm moving on. Great. Oh, thank you, Walter. I'm glad it was helpful. So, next up, on October 22nd is our third and final webinar for ABE Foundations. In that, we're going to cover content standards, volunteers in adult basic education, and professional development. ABE Foundations course is available to everybody online, and you can get deeper information within that as well. Okay, and I facilitate that course. I provide feedback, score, and offer CEUs. Okay. Oh, great, Lanessa. I'm glad you learned stuff. Good. Okay. So, Patsy, if you want to make a plug for Hamlin, here you go.
Sure. So if you are interested in pursuing an adult basic education license or a master's degree related to adult literacy or ESL or master's in teaching, for example, those kinds of things are available at Hamlin where Atlas is housed. The license, the ABE license, is actually only available through Hamlin. No other institution in the state offers it. So I'm just going to drop some information here in case people are interested, and then I can connect you with those people who are in charge of seeing where you are with your credits and what you still need to do and what you can count towards that work. And yeah, lots of people have been through that coursework, and we try to keep it very grounded in practical stuff. So there is just a lot of expertise in the field, and we pull in people from the field to teach those courses here at Hamlin.
I learned a lot, and I took the first year, 1-year certificate program. I learned tons. So
I'm
super
glad
helpful.
to hear that, Rachel. Yeah,
Yep.
so that's available, and I'm happy to, if people have specific questions, you're welcome to shoot me an email. And then Katrina had a question. I don't know if you saw it, Rachel.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the website to get training? I need to sign up a team member for TOPS Pro training. Okay. So, Katrina, so the training for Costas and TABE kind of covers a lot more about testing itself. TOPS Pro is that back end database, and they might cover a little bit about it. But Costas itself, I think has some online, like webinars or something on that. But TOPS Pro, it looks ugly. I can see what I can find for you. Okay. And Marty might know more. She is the guru for state testing too. Okay.
Okay, because we have a staff member who's been charged with doing online CASA steps testing. So I want to get them trained and ready to go for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can drop Marty's email in the chat too. That might be your most direct way to an answer, Katrina.
Yep.
Great.
In the
Great,
support
perfect.
staff conference, Katrina, there's going to be a session on tips and tricks for CASAS e-testing, and that's either e-testing in person or online. So, and I've done it, and we can definitely help you out. No worries. Come to me, come to Marty if you have questions. Okay.
I have a
Here's
quick
that
question.
support staff info for you
Oh
there.
yeah, we got
And then
another
Brad.
question.
I have a quick
Thank
question. This is
you.
Walter.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is the correct format for it or correct forum. My question is regarding contact hours. Here at Summit, we have a Summit Prep program which prepares students that did not get passing scores on the TAPE exam to take to prepare them for the GED. And then we have the extensions program where students that did not get testing scores after passing or did not pass the test after the 10-week GED program are able to go into an extensions program to where we work with them and start working on an adult diploma. So my question is, would these students also qualify as contact hours that we could utilize, or they just have to be within the 10-week GED program that we offer?
Well, I mean, if they're working with an ABE instructor in the classroom, that's contact hours.
Okay.
Or a trained volunteer, that's contact hours.
Okay.
Any additional anything to add, Patsy or Brad, to that?
You said it correct. Yeah. So, Walter, the diploma work with those students, if they're not focusing on GED, but working on the standard adult diploma, those hours can be documented as contact hours, exactly as Rachel said. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Last but not least, you will get a follow-up email with this recording and the PDF slides with the links that you can click on and share with friends and family. Okay. October 22nd, you'll also receive an evaluation link. Any feedback you give is welcome. We really appreciate it, and we want to improve to give better service. Of course, at the CEUs, continuing education units that reflect your participation in this webinar series will be issued then too. Okay. And thank you. We're done.
Yeah, thank you. I
Right
just
on
saw how
time.
quickly went. Perfect. Thank you, Rachel. A couple chats ago was the announcements doc. Just a reminder to open that up when you have a chance to, and then I dropped that support services info. Thanks, everyone. I'll pause the recording. You're
Thank you,
welcome to
Patty.
stay on with questions.